Welcome to the Days, Hours, Attendance, Membership, and Two-Way Interactions session. Today you have Brian Solosky. I am a specialist with the Office of Financial Management. We also have Jessica Beagle. We both work pretty much full-time with pupil accounting issues. Today we're going to be focusing on the return to learn laws. This is kind of a opportunity for us to revisit and update folks on what's been happening. Included in this will be discussion about days and hours, our attendance requirement, two-way interactions, membership, and we've added a slide for end-of-year reporting. Even though this isn't truly a pupil accounting issue, it's something that keeps coming up, and we want people to be aware of what it is and what the expectation is for it as well. The Return to Learn law is, of course, a package of three acts, and essentially what they're doing is providing districts with a lot of flexibility in terms of how they're going to educate students this year. Under these laws, all students are considered pandemic learners for this school year. The new school or the new laws waive strict compliance with the day and hour requirements. That doesn't mean that the 180 days and 1,098 hours necessarily goes away, but what it is doing is changing how it might look. We also have Public Act 165, that's the newest edition. That act updated some of our previous guidance, and we've included those updates in today's presentation.
So the premise for this year is having these altered requirements, and the idea is to allow maximum flexibility for districts, whether your students are in person, remote, a combination of modalities, or transitioning between them due to COVID-related closures. There shouldn't be an effect on the district's days and hours requirements for this year, depending on whether you ask the questions that we're going to cover here in just a minute. There, of course, is an expectation that the district will have a plan in place to transition those students who might be removing from in-person to a remote setting or vice versa. So what does it look like for a district to demonstrate the requirements for this year? How are we going to demonstrate that we're providing 180 days of content, which is the requirement? We're looking to find that you've provided 180 days and 1,098 hours worth of content, the same as you have in previous years. To demonstrate this, the most straightforward method may be to provide a school calendar showing 180 school days, just as you have in the past. Districts could also show that there's availability of their teachers to the students, either by phone, by email, by text, using some sort of platform like Zoom, and provide that availability to students. Alternatively, districts may demonstrate they're providing the same instructional content as they have in previous school years. And simply put, this means that if the district's schedule has always been 6 courses and those courses would have taken 180 days to teach last year, the district would continue to provide a 6-course schedule. So moving on to hours, what does it look like to demonstrate the hours as we have in past years? And the districts, in a memo that we put out initially in the Return to Learn Details memo, they were given 3 options to demonstrate hours, and they're very similar to the days. As suggested with the days, districts can show that their teachers are available to students. They can also examine the amount of course content and project the hours it would take to provide that course content. Or the district can show that the combination of courses scheduled over 180 days should produce 1,098 hours of content as it has in previous years. So how do we demonstrate that students are still receiving 1,098 hours of instructional content? Similar to creating a calendar of days, the district can demonstrate their instructional hours using the days and hours of instruction forms provided in previous years. These determine the instructional hours based on the minutes of scheduled instructional time daily based on a VEL schedule. This works well if we're in a seated environment, but it doesn't always translate to other modalities. Instead, districts may use pacing guides to demonstrate time, or if a course has been previously offered and the content is the same, that can serve as a documentation of instructional time for that course. We've also provided a couple of formulas in the Return to Learn memo to assist districts with some of this, if that is the option that they choose to use. So the question has been asked, what if a district wants to schedule or wants to stagger start times or the end time of a day to release students and to help with social distancing, or parent pickup at the end of the day, or students loading buses and unloading buses? Staggered schedules are allowable if the content of the course is not reduced or affected. If a district needs flexibility with staggering schedules and meeting the content expectation, the district might consider utilizing virtual learning from home to account for any reductions in content for those courses. Also, if a district has a staggered schedule, say group A comes in from 8 to 2 or group B comes in from 9 to 3, and the district can provide actual hours and days calculation to their auditor. So say they've come up with 990 hours and 175 days. They could also provide a certification statement referencing section 101.13, stating that the district is still providing the same content as they have in prior years. So now we'd like to cover some of the questions that have been asked that we've seen multiple times regarding days and hours. And the first question is, I have a district that is dismissing all buildings at 2 p.m. In a normal school year, they would dismiss at 3:10. Teachers are required to use the extra hour to work on communication for remote learners and anything else for planning. The question is, can they add the extra hour to their calendar for instructional time? Now, reducing instructional time for there are various reasons why a district would reduce instructional time. The top 5 or so, 6 that we've heard is they're reducing the number of days to provide PD. They're scheduling only one group of students for testing. They might be moving the start date back due to construction, allowing for additional preparation for the year, taking days to prepare for virtual parent-teacher conferences, which are new this year, or they might be reducing the day that students are in person for instruction. This should not negatively impact the districts. Districts should still provide the auditor with evidence that they're providing the same amount of content as in previous years. And one way to do that is to document the same number of courses by providing a schedule or your clock hours document demonstrating the number of periods, and you combine that with a certification statement referencing 101.13 and stating that they're providing the same course content as they have in prior years. Just note that a certification statement alone would not be sufficient. Another question is, if they heard during the auditor webinar that we hosted in September that it was explained that districts would be okay with less than 180-day calendar year, bring the same content, and if they were offering the same number of courses as previous years when they had 180 and 1,098 hour calendar. It was stated then we would not need to look further and could accept a certification statement that complies with subsection 13. Where can I find subsection 13 you are referencing, and what is it? So if you were to Google MCL 388.1701, typically your first result will take you to the section of law that talks about days, hours, and attendance requirements. Under this section, you will find section 13, which speaks specifically to the requirements for this year. By referring to this section in a certification statement, the district is acknowledging their awareness of the requirement and that they will meet the requirement for the year. The next question is, we have a regional middle college, and it's always been approved for a days and hours waiver. The program has been designed to revolve around the college calendar. There would need to be extreme redesign of the program if required to meet 180 days and 1,098 hours. Will the waivers be available for the 2021 school year? The waiver for the days and hours was made available at the end of September. The deadline to submit the application was October 5th. We believe that the waiver link is still available and you could work with that department or that office because the deadline has passed. I'm sure they would be happy to work with you, and districts that have had the waiver in the past are encouraged to apply. It's important here to note that the waiver is not meant for reducing days and hours requirements due to the circumstances related to the pandemic this year. We have plenty of flexibility in the law that is allowing us to meet those requirements. So we're looking only for those programs typically that have had the waiver in the past. Another question we received, we submitted our calendar following the guidelines using staff PDs for instructional days according to according to section 10110. Our calendar was approved to have 6 PD count for the year as instructional days. Do they still count as instructional days, or do we have to redo our calendar for reapproval? The section of law that allows for PD to be counted as instructional time is still active. This means that if you've met the requirements of section 10110, you can use those PD days to demonstrate that you're meeting the days and hours requirement for this school year. Next question. Could you provide an interpretation of available to students under the hours section in letter A of the Return to Learn memo details, which states, identify hours each scheduled day of instruction where teaching staff are available to students, which total at least 1,098 hours of availability. So basically, we're looking at when is the teacher scheduled to be working. The teacher may be available to students in the classroom at certain times, available by email, by phone, text, or even by Zoom or Google Classroom during certain periods of the day. This availability would be shared with the students. Just a couple more questions that we've received. Are the requirements for counting professional development towards the days and hours waived if the district has already put in their extended COVID-19 learning plan that PD time is counted toward their 180 day and 1,098 hours of instruction? Or is it expected that in order to count the days and or hours of professional development time toward meeting the 180 days and 1,098 hours, a district will need to meet all of the prescribed requirements in order to count professional development toward their days and hours as outlined in section 10110. So this is an interesting question. If you're using PD to demonstrate the 1,098 hours or the 180 days and you want to consider it instructional time, the district would need to meet section 10110. But with that being said, the requirement is to demonstrate that the content being provided is the same as what it would have been in a prior year, and that would have taken 1,098 hours and 180 days to provide. So if the district wanted to use days where instruction was previously scheduled to provide PD, they can still demonstrate the content is, and they can still demonstrate that the content is being provided. There's really no consequence to the district for doing this. Another question asking for clarification on screen time. If we have a non-sequential learner attending live synchronous instruction throughout the day, are they allowed to go off camera or offline for portions of their class to work independently so that we can still count them as attended in our SIS for that scheduled period. Yes, there's no expectation for students to be online for a full 5 or 6 hours of the day. Independent work time is acceptable as it would be in a typical classroom environment. And our final question on days and hours. The question is regarding lunch. As long as a certified teacher is present during lunch, can that time be counted as instructional time? If a meal is being served during class, then that time remains countable. This is not considered a lunch period per se, because you're having lunch during that instructional time, or you're serving a meal during that instructional time.
Okay. Now we transition to discussing two-way interactions. Two-way interactions, of course, are a communication that occurs between the student and a teacher, and now a mentor. So any combination of those two things could occur: student, teacher, or student and mentor, and that would be countable two-way interactions. The two-way interactions can take multiple forms. It could be the student is physically present, either through a platform like Zoom, or they're actually present with the teacher in a classroom. They may also have an email dialogue, or an instant message, or a telephone conversation. The newest addition is that assignments can be used to help complete your two-way interactions. So the student would turn in the assignment, and then feedback would be received from the instructor on that assignment. So who can do two-way interaction? This has also been changed. This change came through in Senate Bill 927, now Public Act 165. And the addition to this is that something like a mentor can now do two-way interactions instead of just having teachers solely responsible for this. And the legislation actually reads that it's a district employee who has responsibility for the pupil's learning, grade progression, or academic progress. So that's a pretty wide open definition. What we do know for sure is that that's definitely could be a teacher of record. It could be a substitute teacher, or it could be what we traditionally know as a mentor. If you are using mentors, your auditor is going to want a list of those employees for when they actually take a look at your two-way interaction logs at the end of the school year. So do be sure to capture the mentors who are doing the interactions, if indeed you are using them. There are three types of two-way, and this is where things kind of get a little confusing. So I'll try to run through it, and then we actually have another graphic that will show that seems to explain it pretty well. First, we have what we've been referring to as the extended COVID-19 learning plan. That's going to come under section 98A. It is two-way interactions per week. Now, this is not audited. There is no state aid penalty if you don't complete it. The goal is to hit at least 75% of your students each week, and that's per the legislation. But if you don't, there is no financial penalty. So once again, it's not audited. There is not a financial penalty exclusively attached to whether or not you hit that goal. But what does happen is it is reported both on your transparency page and publicly through your reconfirmation meetings. So those two ways do help you meet the next two requirements. The first of which is our 75% attendance requirement, and that comes under section 101. Normally we would have attendance taken 180 days of the year if students either there or they're not. This time it's just one two-way interaction each month, and you just have to hit 75% of your students during the month in order to avoid a state aid penalty. The last of the three is membership. Section 6 is where this is derived from. It is one two-way interaction per week during the count period. So districts might be using this, or they might be using an alternate method to reach the membership requirement. So it's important to find out which of the two we're using, or maybe it's a combination. But there you have it. We have 3 types of two-way. And for the grid, this really lays it out nicely. It's going to tell you whether or not there's a penalty potentially applied. It tells you whether or not this information is audited. It gives you the target, if there is one. So very informative. Hopefully this is helpful to you folks. Now, we've often had the question about whether or not two-ways are prorated. They've been prorated in the past. Are they still prorated now? So what we can say is that districts need to have 1 two-way each week for count. If that's what they're using for membership purposes, during each week that the student is enrolled. So if a student happens to move to another district, as long as the district had a two-way interaction for each week while the student was enrolled, there is no proration of the membership. So an example of that is we have a student who is enrolled for the first 2 weeks during the count period and then moves to another district. So as long as the student had a two-way interaction for the first 2 weeks before the student enrolled somewhere else, there's no proration of the membership. What you will see is probably a Section 25E transfer. Some frequently asked questions. We still are hearing about whether or not attendance records can be used and for who they can be used. And so attendance is something that can now be used to document a two-way interaction. It's either your physical in-person attendance, so we're taking attendance like we would in any other year, or it could be a student who's attending live lessons through a synchronous platform. Now, those live lessons are scheduled. The student is expected to show up, and if they don't, they're marked absent. So it's kind of like what we're doing for our physically present students. And the other is, do we have to have two interactions for shared time students? The Return to Learn law doesn't exempt any student from the requirements. So yes, you must have two interactions for your shared time students. So now we're going to get into some of the most frequently asked questions. The first is, how long do we need to maintain our two-way records? 7 years. So please keep those records of your two-way interactions for 7 years. This is to account for potential requests for this documentation by state auditors as well as your own. The next question is, if a district is having trouble getting information out of their middle school children, so these are students in grades 6 through 8, can we have the parent do the two-way for them? And the answer is no. So two-way interactions are meant to be between the student and teacher, or the student and the mentor, unless the student requires assistance in doing so per an IEP or is in one of the younger grades that we do allow such a thing. The next question is, if a teacher gives an assignment and the student turns it in, and then the teacher responds individually to the student, is that considered a two-way interaction? Yes, by responding to the student's submission, that completes the two-way conversation, so we have a good two-way. Next question, parent or guardian facilitated two-way interaction may be required if a pupil is in grades K through 5, and does not yet possess skills necessary to participate in two-way unassisted. So yes, parents, guardians, they can be involved for our young learners, those that are in grades K through 5, as well as students who have an IEP documents the necessity for parent or guardian to be involved. Next question. While discussing two-way communications, one of our instructional coaches asked if the teacher of record contacts a student, may they discuss a different subject than what they teach, or does that teacher need to discuss only the subject that they're teaching? So yeah, I mean, the two-way interactions need to be specific to the course that the person teaches, unless it's a mentor, and then they become a little bit more general. Now, there's nothing that prevents that instructional coach from saying, hey, how are you doing in these other subject areas? But make sure to get in that conversation about what is related to that actual teacher's course. Always good to have in-depth conversations with students, but for our requirements, please make sure that that teacher is discussing course relevant topics. Next question: for membership purposes, we require one two-way interaction for each week during the count period. Is that the same requirement if we have students who are attending synchronously, where we're using attendance for the purpose of two-way? And the answer is yes. So we can use attendance, as a two-way interaction, physically or synchronously. It could be used for two-way. You do need to have one of those each week during the count period. It only needs to be about one of the courses that the student is scheduled to be taking. All right. What is the appropriate documentation for phone conversations? Is filling out, completing the pupil list log enough, or do they need to have additional documentation to support that phone conversation? So we give a pretty good example of what we expect those two ways to look like. A nice example of what a log may look like in the pupil accounting manual. So check that out. It's in the exhibit section, so it's near the very back of that manual. But I think there you're going to find something that kind of will help you get your bearings on what these are supposed to look like. If you could possibly address the question posed during the last webinar, it would be great. Would this be acceptable as a form of two-way for count purposes? A teacher releases an assignment to the students via Google Form or some other platform like Google Classroom. A student completes the assignment and submits it to the teacher. Then the teacher responds individually to each of the students with maybe a score or maybe a synopsis. You did great in that class, or you did great in that assignment, or you seems like you're really understanding that chapter. Is that acceptable? And our answer currently, after being able to allow obviously assignments to be used as part of the two-way, is yes. The department released a memo on September 28 that clarified that two-way interactions, according to that memo, can be assignments for the school year. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they'll continue to be allowed for next school year, but for this school year, assignments are okay. The assignment should be relevant to the course curriculum. The assignment would be posted by the student's teacher for the week, and the student would complete and submit that assignment during that week. That's key. We have to have a way to know when that assignment was actually submitted. So if you're going to use assignments, that means you're probably going to want to have something that you can print out from the learning management system that shows what date that was actually turned in. Lastly, we want to have some sort of evaluation or review of the assignment by the teacher, and then the teachers are strongly encouraged to grade and or provide constructive feedback. Think of this assignment as a two-way interaction. For membership. There needs to be at least one per week of count period. So that's important to know. Next question: can face-to-face attendance be used for the accountability/transparency reporting piece? And yes, in-person attendance can be used to satisfy the two-way requirements found in Section 98A, which relates to that accountability/transparency reporting requirement. And also keep in mind that while you're doing those two ways, it's satisfying the two-way requirements for membership and attendance. So this has swayed a lot of districts toward using two-way interactions rather than count day assignments, simply because we still have to do those two ways for other things. So if we've got to do them for 98A, we should probably think about recycling them and using them for other purposes as well. Next question: if the district is going full face-to-face, do they still need attendance two-way one time a week during the 4 weeks of count? It used to be that just taking attendance on count day was good enough. If they aren't there on count day, then they could be present or do an assignment within 10-30 days for membership. So attendance that's being taken in each class on a student's schedule on count day does satisfy the membership requirement. And if a student is absent, then they have the 10-30 day rule apply. So I don't see, if you're trying to meet the membership requirement by completing assignments or an activity in each course, or being physically present in each course on count day, and the student happens to be absent from one of those classes or absent from all of them, then the 1030 day rule does kick in. That rule, it's important to distinguish, does not apply to two-way interactions, but it does apply to physical attendance. It does apply to the completion of activities on count day. With that said, I think I'm going to turn it over to Jessica for the second half of these questions.
Yes, thank you. So part two of the two-way interaction questions, there were a lot of them, and so we're trying to make sure that we clarify them for you. The question is, what type of penalty, if any, will be posed if teachers do not complete the two-way interaction logs per week? And this is referring to the requirement under Section 98A of the State School Aid Act, which does require that there's two-way interactions in order to receive state aid. However, there isn't a specific monetary penalty imposed for not completing those. Districts are required to, number one, announce publicly their participation rates for each week during the month, or during that month during their reconfirmation meeting. And number two, they're required to post those rates on their website for transparency. So while there is no state aid penalty necessarily tied to those two ways, there is substantial accountability just because of the amount of transparency that is required. Next question. In trying to plan ahead of a possible realistic scenario, could you please provide your thoughts on if a teacher is out due to sickness or quarantine, etc., could the substitute for the teacher take over the two-way interaction logs for that teacher, whether certified or not? A properly certified substitute teacher can perform the two-way interactions or take attendance as appropriate. Next question. One of my districts would like to assign a co-teacher to classes to assist the lead teacher with two-way interactions. The co-teachers are grade level certified, but not necessarily subject certified. Is this allowable? And I believe this question came in prior to the Senate Bill 927, which was passed. And those two-way interactions were expanded to allow district employees other than the teacher who has responsibility for the pupil's learning, grade progression, or academic progress to perform the two-way interactions. So that would be acceptable. Next question. Most of our students are attending daily, but wanted to make sure that if they are marked present twice in a week, that fulfills the requirements. And the answer is yes. And if a student is participating asynchronously, we would want to document the two-way communication twice per week where the teacher initiates communication and response from that student follows that communication. And that is accurate as well. So next question. What are the reporting requirements when a district does not meet for all 5 days of the week due to scheduled time off in the district calendar or less days due to an unforeseen emergency? Would two-way interaction requirements be different for a 4-day week, 3-day week, or a 2-day week? So if a school break is scheduled during the count period and is 4 days or longer, the requirement for weekly two-way interaction does not apply to that week. If instruction has been canceled district-wide during a week for 3 school days or longer, the requirement for weekly two-way interactions does not apply for that week either. Next question. For clarification, if students are attending school for a traditional learning experience during the 2021 school year, we would still be required to document the two-way communication occurring and a summary of the individualized discussion for each student. Additionally, FTEs for all students will be determined solely on the documentation of the two-way communication with students this year, and school daily operational hours will not have any impact on how FTEs are determined. So for this year, all students are considered pandemic learners, and all students either need to have the two-way interactions or perform an activity in each of their course on count day for membership. So for traditional learners, attendance makes a lot of sense. It can be used as a two-way interaction and as an activity on count day, which means that the attendance record will also help you meet the requirements under 98A. Next question, can ESL or special education teachers maintain two-way interaction logs if the student is on their caseload, but the teacher is not listed on as the teacher on the student's schedule? Yes, but they would need to be included in the list of mentors that would be provided to your auditor. Next question, can two-way communications occur on the same day with the same teacher? And our answer is yes. AM and PM can be, you can take attendance in AM and in the PM for elementary students, and those can be your two-way interactions. Next question, with a nonverbal cognitive impaired students, would a conversation with parents regarding content and progress count as a two-way interaction? And yes, a parent can assist with the two-way interactions for students with an IEP. Next question, is there a template on how districts report their rate of two-way interactions monthly? We have not provided a template, I do not believe. I believe it's been left at the district's discretion to determine how they want to report those interactions. If a parent calls a student in ill or for a funeral or other circumstance, do we mark them in our SIS, or does the two-way interaction count as attendance for the Wednesday to Tuesday? The two-way interaction would not count. If the student was expected to be in attendance, he or she would be marked absent. And the final two-way question, does the two-way interaction record need to be signed and dated by the teacher? And there has never been a requirement for the two-way interaction to be signed by the teacher, so no, that does not need to have the signature of the teacher on it.
Okay, thank you, Jessica. We're going to move on to our 75% attendance requirement now. You know, in a normal year, as we said before, attendance would have been measured, at least for the 75% attendance purposes, over 180 days. You would be looking to, you know, reach at least 75% of your students in attendance on each of those days to avoid a penalty. And your penalty was based off of 1/180th, so you had 180 days to kind of split that penalty over. This year is quite a bit different. Attendance is not being measured by whether or not a student is physically present. It's being measured by two-way interactions, and it's being measured by the students having at least one two-way interaction a month. So you're looking to make contact with at least 75% of your students once per month. Now, it was originally stated that it would be measured over 10 months. Senate Bill 927 reduced that to 9, and it left it up to the districts to choose which 9. So if you started off the school year in August and you only were in session for a few days, you probably don't want to look at that month for your 75% attendance purposes. I think we have a few questions related, more specifically, 2 questions related to 75%. It looks like for the count window, the week begins on Wednesday and ends on Tuesday. Should we use that format for 75% attendance purposes? Or does the 75% attendance need to be counted Monday through Friday? So yeah, for membership purposes, the week starts on count day. So it goes from a Wednesday to the following, or to the Tuesday that follows. So we are suggesting that you follow that same model for 75% attendance. We're also suggesting that you do that for 98A because we don't want to confuse folks with what the expectation is, what days are going to be measured. So it's not prescribed for 98A or 75% attendance. So we'll just put that out there. But for membership, Wednesday through Tuesday, everything else we're suggesting you follow the same. You could deviate if you wanted to. The next question is, does the 75% rule apply only to the months where students are scheduled? So the answer to that is yes. However, the requirement should be noted that it changed from 10 months to 9. That gives the districts the ability to choose which months will be used. And moving on, we'll let Jessica talk about the super blend.
Okay, so I'm sure you're already aware, but we'll just throw this in here that this year's funding is being referred to as a super blend. It's a blend of 75% of last year's membership and 25% of this year's membership. For districts with the 3-year average, we had about 70 or so districts this year. If they still benefit from that 3-year average will still apply. For first and second year PSAs, we still have the 50-50 blend as we have in past years, along with new grades. And so we had one question that came up a couple times regarding membership, and the question was regarding Section 25E. Will the new state aid blend affect the 25E dollar amount that transfers as comparative to prior years? Yes. However, it's important to note that your fall membership is weighted at 22.5% this year. For those transfers, the district should consider if the benefit of claiming the students under 25E outweighs the cost of doing so.
Okay, thank you, Jessica. So continuing on, the next topic is going to be about what we need to do during the count period. Of course, we're currently experiencing one of those now. There is one more yet this year, so if you don't know it, now you will. The first thing is that we can use 2 different ways to meet the membership requirement. I think the most sensible way probably is the 2-way interactions for most folks. The other way that you could go is by completing an activity in each course that the student has scheduled. It's key to note that there are slight differences between what is an activity when we have students carrying a traditional schedule, meaning that they have 6 classes on their course schedule, and each day or each week they're attempting an assignment or something in each of those 6 classes, versus what we know as sequential learners, who have still the same 6 course schedule, but only attempt 1 class at a time. And once that class is finished, then they move on to the next. So we have 4 different measures that we consider to be activities for our traditional students, and those are things like attendance in a live lesson. It could also be a login. It could be a conversation with the student. And that conversation could happen through a platform like Skype or Zoom, or it could be through a telephone call. The last option would be an email. So it's important to note that if you're using attendance, we're not strictly saying that that's only for our in-person students. It could also be applied to synchronous learners. So if you have a student who logs in and attends live lessons, they're scheduled, for attendance in live lessons through Zoom, then as long as the student has or attends each of those lessons on count day, you're done. You don't have to monitor that student anymore. If they're absent, we'll talk about what happens in an upcoming slide. For our sequential learners, and again, these are the students that have still 6 classes scheduled, but they're only going to attempt 1 or 2 at a time. Slight differences in what is considered an activity. The first thing that is common between our traditional students and this is that live lessons or attendance in a live lesson is an acceptable activity. And it, of course, could be through a platform like Zoom or Skype or whatever you use. Now, the last 3 are kind of similar. So the student would either complete an assignment, or they complete a lesson or an activity, or let's say that it's a larger assignment that's going to take a few days. You can somehow document that that student started it, but didn't finish it. So those 3 different types of things would be acceptable. Now, if you have a student who's scheduled to be in attendance on count day, and they're not, then the 10-30-day rule kicks in. And of course, that's going to allow a student who is unexcused to have 10 more school days immediately following the count day to complete an assignment or an activity in this case in each course on the student's schedule. If they're excused, which I imagine a lot of students would really fall into the excused category this year, given the current situation, then they have the entire count period to complete an assignment in each course. Just want to clarify, though, we've received this question a number of times. The 10-30-day rule does not apply to two-way interactions. Okay, now we have some questions that we've received regarding this. The first is, in some of our schools, we have teachers that are instructing remotely and the students are in the building. If the teacher assigns an activity to these students who are learning asynchronously, while under the supervision of a class monitor or a mentor, and the students are working while physically present in the building, would the students be recorded as being present on their attendance records? And so the answer to this is no. That those students, while present with an adult or a mentor, they're not in attendance with their actual teacher. However, if during a portion of that class period there was synchronous instruction taking place, you could actually take attendance. But if there isn't, and let's say that those students are strictly asynchronous and being monitored by a mentor, then that mentor is going to record that face-to-face interaction as a two-way. And they would need 4 of those, one for each week of the count period for membership purposes. So the next question, I understand that if a student attends a live lesson, that counts for attendance in two-way, correct? But what if a student does not attend a live lesson but communicates with a teacher via phone or email? Should they be marked as present for attendance as well, or just documented as having a two-way interaction? So if you're only going to keep attendance records for students who are expected to be in attendance, and that could be either physically in attendance or in attendance in a synchronous, lesson at a specific time. So this is emulating our traditional classroom environment. If it's not that, then it's a two-way interaction, and that's what it sounded like. This question is really getting at. So I would look at that as a two-way. So the next question is additional evidence, i.e. students sign in on the chat, beyond marking a remote learner as present in a synchronous Zoom meeting required? And do we have to download the Zoom attendance every day? So we are asking you at the department to maintain a log of the attendees in these sessions whenever possible. And this isn't for pupil accounting audit purposes, but it is to help solve and back up that we have students attending during this non-traditional time. So we know that we are going to get audited by the state, and they're going to want to look at your records. This is another piece of documentation that backs up that these students were participating. So we ask that you do, maintain those. Some platforms allow you to download a list of attendees. Others don't. If they don't, our suggestion has been to go ahead and have the students just say hi when they log into the class, and typically you can copy and paste or download the chat if nothing else. So that's a solution for you. So if you would please maintain that, that would be very helpful and appreciated by us. Next question. Our SIS is set up for AM and PM attendance in our center-based program as students are in class all day. If a student becomes a remote synchronous learner, is the teacher required to take both AM and PM attendance for the virtual learner who is attending synchronously? How does AM and PM attendance affect asynchronous learners? So our answer is yes, that if a student is expected to be in attendance for the scheduled course in person or synchronous, attendance must be taken as it would be in a traditional year. If a student is asynchronous, then there is not an expectation for the student to be present. There would be no attendance record for those students on those days. So that's really the difference between the two. The whole idea is, do we expect the student to be in class with their teacher or not? And in our more virtual environments, the learning is really at their own pace. So in those cases, there's no attendance record being maintained. Next question. If using count day activity for membership, do they need one for each of the 4 weeks of the count? If the count day activity is done on count day, do they need to have at least one of the students' teachers be part of that? If absent, do they need to have a login or etc. for each scheduled course within the 10-30 days? So to clarify here, if we're doing the count day activity, that's our Route 2. I think that's how we refer to it in a lot of cases. Then we're looking for something on count day, an activity in each of the students' scheduled courses on count day. So if there's 6 scheduled courses, we want to see 6 logins, or attendance for 6 courses, or we want to have some other indication that the students progressing or working along in their courses. And if they don't, then the 10-30 day rule kicks in. Now, we get into doing 2As, which cover the 4 weeks of the count for students who do not have an expectation of doing something on count day. They aren't scheduled to be either physically present or present online in a class on count day. So these are the students that we just spoke about not really having an attendance record. Those students definitely are going to be using 2A interactions, unless the district has determined a way for those students to complete something on count day otherwise. But there's a difference. If you're doing the count day activities, then yeah, it's just hopefully count day itself. And then after that, you can focus on other things, with the exception of the students that don't complete an activity in each course. So the next question, if a student is 100% virtual at the local district but attends face-to-face at the tech center, where attendance is taken daily and the course is with a teacher, can that face-to-face attendance at the tech center be used to satisfy the count day membership requirement for the student, or does the local district need to meet the count day attendance requirement for the virtual student in another way? So yeah, if you've got the kid attending face-to-face at some point in the day, then that physical attendance is the 2-way for the student. So did you have the student or that teacher take attendance for the student while they're there? That certainly helps you get your 2-way requirements under control. So the next question is, if a student is attending face-to-face or synchronous, does the 10-30 rule apply now? And yes, it does. The 10-30 day rule definitely applies to those students who are face-to-face or synchronous. Can you use attendance, and is it allowable for membership to have the 10-30 day rule, but for the weekly 2-way? You can't use attendance. Is that correct? or I'm sorry, for the weekly two-way, you can't use the 10-30-day rule. Is that correct? And the answer is yes. That's correct. Two-way interactions don't have the benefit of being able to use the 10-30 days. That only applies to the students who are trying to complete an activity in each scheduled course on count day. Okay, end of year accountability. Now, this isn't something that you typically see us in pupil counting speaking to, but this year we've received a number of questions, and it's understandable. The reason being that this year, for that end of year accountability, two-way interactions are going to be used to tell what the chronic absenteeism rates are. So. And of course, it looks way different than it would in a typical year because we're using two-way interactions, for accountability as provided under 98A. So, what is it that we need to report? If you have a student who has two-way interactions during a week, that student is going to be reported in this end of year accountability report as having been present for 5 days. If the student only had one two-way, that student is going to be reported as having 3 days that week. And if there are no two-ways, that's 0 days. So again, this isn't something that pupil accounting normally touches on, but our messages are crossing paths, so we found it relevant to the conversation and thought that folks would want to know. So here we are, we're sharing it out. I do believe that additional communications are both coming out from MDE's accountability office as well as CEPI on this. Now, there were a couple other questions. We really couldn't find a good category for them, so let me get to those now. For sequential or consecutive learning schedule students, would the auditors be expected to see an EDP for those students? And the answer is no, that there isn't a requirement for an EDP this year. So the only trick is we need to see something that's going to demonstrate that the student is on and was planned to be on a sequential schedule. So in a normal year, we would expect that the EDP contain a timeline. So this year, instead of having an entire EDP, we would say minimally you would want to provide your auditor with a timeline showing when that sequential student was or would be expected to attempt each of the courses on the student's schedule. The next question is parental consent still required for virtual? And the answer is no. Again, this is something that was struck as part of our return to learn laws. So parental consent is not required for this year. I would look for that to probably return next year. So we're going to move on to the next slide.
Okay, so MDE issued some guidance for the field that you can refer to if you need to. We put out the Return to Learn Law Details memo in August when everything first came out. And then not too long ago, we released a two-way interaction memo to help clarify what a two-way interaction is and what it looks like. And we've put additional information in there like the grid that you saw earlier. And it does also talk about how those interaction rates are calculated in each section under the attendance and 98A, etc. We like to provide these resources for you. We've included the House fiscal analysis, the Senate fiscal analysis, and then each of the different bills that were passed and the sections of law that they updated, or the new section, which is section 98A for this year. And then we have recorded a webinar previously. We had the Return to Learn Law webinar series. Our PowerPoint presentation from that is out there. We have a frequently asked questions coming soon. We may this webinar that we're doing right now with you is updated to the webinar that was posted there, but if you're interested in listening to what was posted there, we go through a lot of questions and interaction with folks who are on the webinar that may be useful to you if you still have questions. So we provide that resource for you here as well.
And that's it. You've reached the conclusion of the presentation today. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to watch this. Take care.